Hello, everyone. We're going to begin in a couple minutes. We're going to wait for everybody to get on. Okay, we still have people joining. We'll wait one more minute. Okay, let's go ahead and begin. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar and virtual discussion on how COVID-19 has changed the game for building operations. My name is Eric Moxham. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Bracklet, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. We're going to start off with a presentation from the Bracklet team about the challenges our customers have been facing and the solutions they have implemented since the crisis began. Next, we're going to dive into a discussion with our AllStar panelists about the observations and actions they are taking during these unprecedented times. We'll then open it up to all of you so you can ask us questions. Lastly, please submit any questions you have to the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. We will answer as many as we can after we hear from our panelists. Last but not least, we will be recording today's webinar for everybody's convenience. We'll provide a link later this week to all attendees. So let's begin. I'm now going to pass the mic to Bracklet's Chief Product Officer and co-founder, Matt Lynch. Take it away, Matt.
Thanks, Eric. Today, we're going to be reviewing how COVID-19 has changed the game for building operations. First, I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm Matt Lynch, Chief Product Officer and co-founder of Bracklet. I oversee product development and work closely with our customers to make sure we're incorporating their most pressing needs into our product. I am also joined here by Trey Bush.
Hi, I'm Trey Bush, Manager of Operations and Engineering. I oversee all of our onboarding and engineering operations, which puts me side by side with daily decisions operators are making in this new normal.
Thanks, Trey. So we'll highlight how building operations have changed to adapt to the needs of tenants, to maintain safe work environments, and how owners and operators develop trust that those needs are being met, while balancing capital investments. This has been challenging as teams have had to adapt operations to changing tenant occupancy and demands, rapidly evaluating new technologies and investments, and establishing good communication with their tenants to make sure that they are comfortable and understand the efforts being put forth by property teams. I'm going to start with operational hurdles that are facing property teams. Teams have had to quickly adapt to new equipment scheduling. And as buildings have drastically changed schedules and equipment operations to meet new building demands, underlying control issues can be exposed. This is increasing the burden on already stretched thin engineering teams. And all the while, teams are trying to automate control adjustments as much as possible to meet load changes and balance comfort, health, and cost. To demonstrate the amount of change, here are the schedules of 6 HVAC units over the course of 6 months. You can see left to right in each column is each piece of equipment's average runtimes, and then top to bottom, we start in January of this year and go to June or July of this year. And so you can see going down month over month that the run hours are changing drastically, but also left to right across equipment, they're also extremely variable. And that's as teams are adapting the operations to specific tenant needs. This much change creates a lot of complexity and time investment for teams. And without technology, it can be easy to make mistakes, which can have impacts on tenant satisfaction and trust. As teams are adapting their systems and controls to meet these new demands, they tend to find underlying controls issues. This can be embedded, hidden overrides on HVAC from zone schedules. And in this case, 86% of unscheduled runtime changes were due to programming issues. So in this time of rapid transition, knowing where the problems are quickly is essential. And teams that prioritize technology can much more effectively respond to and resolve issues. And these issues do not always require capital investment, but can have profound effects, like this example. And here, the y-axis is runtimes that are not scheduled, and the x-axis is time. So on the left is April of this year, and on the right is the present. And so just because the trend is down does not mean the building isn't still changing quickly to new environments. In fact, it is. They just have overcome the burdens of those issues that they first experienced at the beginning of the pandemic. So in a time when teams are stretched thin and demands are high, technology allows teams to become even more efficient. This building team leveraged technology to continuously make adjustments and changes with less issues over time. And this has a real impact on ensuring that tenant needs are being met while managing facilities' operational expenses. Using technology like building simulations, which are normalized for weather and occupancy, the building performance can be measured with a high degree of accuracy. Just look at this example, which had a 46% energy reduction in the month of June. So I'm going to pause and we're going to take our first poll, which you should see on your screens momentarily. The first poll is, what is the most commonly cited safety measure that must be implemented to make tenants feel sufficiently confident to return to their offices? We have a couple options: lobby temperature checks, air filtration of MERV 13 or higher ratings, ventilation, UV lighting, ionization, and then all of the above or none of the above. And we'll just give a moment for folks to put in their answers. We should be getting our results soon. By and far, the highest selection was air filtration, and specifically air filters that have a rating of 13 or plus, a MERV rating of 13 or plus, which is really interesting. Thanks, everybody. So now we're going to dive into some of those investments, some of those things that will make tenants feel safe. So in addition to the highly dynamic environment that these teams are facing, decisions on new investments are even more important to keep buildings healthy while balancing the cost. The first example that we'll dive into is air quality and particle sensors. Currently, sensoring in buildings is great for things like humidity, CO2 levels, and this helps teams keep a high indoor air quality. However, they have not been proven to identify viral or bacterial particles. But there is promise. The industry is closely watching active research in this area. Next is air filtration, which does appear to be the highest voted technology from the poll. So many property teams prudently installed at least MERV 13 filters, as was recommended by ASHRAE. However, there are filters that can have cost impacts on teams that should be considered. For instance, if the filters can be washed, which would extend the life cycle of that filter. Last are UV and ionization technologies. UV has been around longer than ionization, but ionization technologies has had a lot of buzz and talk recently. UV can be challenging to design and install due to the residency time. Viral particles need to be exposed under the UV light. So placement and design considerations within the building is essential if you're going forward with that technology. Ionization, though a newer technology, has seen a number of third-party tests conducted on both its effectiveness on viral particulate matter and amount of ozone emissions. It can also be placed upstream of coils and will help them be cleaner for longer. And so it is becoming an exciting and cost-effective way owners and operators can invest in the health of their buildings. So with technology, owners and operators can understand the impacts of these investments on their buildings. For instance, even a simple filter replacement where all options meet ASHRAE standards. The options can have differences in their economics, like this example, where a washable MERV 13 filter saved $20,000 a year, while the other MERV 13 filter costs $10,000 a year. When simulating the impacts on different systems, you can see how the filter that saved money used more pump energy, but was greatly outweighed by the savings from the fan systems. So each building has different systems and situations, and as teams are balancing the effectiveness and costs in this uncertain time, technology can help provide specific information to them to make the right decisions for their circumstance.
So early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of uncertainty around what was considered safe operations. ASHRAE put out a guideline for the best practices during those uncertain times and recommended a 24/7 ventilation system operating schedule as a precaution. They've of course evolved these guidelines as new data and information has come out, but that means that building operators have to stay on top of the changing recommendations. In conversations I've had, every building operator shares a common thread of thinking right now. They are prioritizing safe operations for their tenants, but are also working to ensure optimized operations for energy. This introduces inherent complexity, as the best operations for their building may be changing with tenancy. So through data and review of designs, you can see in the example below that specific buildings' needs can be met while prioritizing both. As occupancy rates decrease substantially, approximately 90%, ventilation rates, which note that a ventilation rate is a per person measurement, do not need to increase substantially to still maintain a safe building. By modifying schedules from 24/7 to 12 hours a day, the ventilation rate is still well above the standard, and a 26% energy savings was realized. Distributed occupancy sensors can also better capture the real-time ventilation demand at each space in the building, allowing for more automated adjustments to changing tenancy. So I want to stop again, take a quick pause, and hear what you all think with another poll question. Do you support adding occupancy sensors to buildings to optimize tenant comfort and safety while best containing operating costs? Yes, no, not sure. We'll wait 10 seconds and get some feedback from the audience. Awesome. So it looks like the vast majority of you guys do support adding occupancy sensors, and that makes a lot of sense. There's some really great benefits to having the automated controls tied into occupancy sensor technology in the building. So bare minimum, you must be running your outdoor air systems, and there's nothing out there saying you shouldn't, and I haven't heard from anyone that says they aren't. Building operators have to stay engaged with the changing landscape of best practices, all while juggling the day-to-day needs of operating their building. You can't just turn it off and you can't just walk away. Using data and simulation technology, they're better able to quickly compare the recommendations with their actual operations and needs. So if it isn't clear yet, buildings have a lot that can change that affects operations. At the top of this list, though, are, you can guess it, tenants themselves. Property teams need to be engaged and maintain consistent communications with their tenants to make sure the building operations are satisfying their needs. The difference between the two buildings below correspond to the property team's level of communication and their ability to adjust to the tenancy rates in their buildings. Building A did not engage early on with the tenancy rate and as the tenancy rate initially decreased, but they still increased their ventilation rates as precaution. This, of course, results in little to no savings. Building B engaged immediately with their tenants and were able to make adjustments to their operations based on their understanding of the tenant needs. Coupled with simple adjustments like closing all the blinds and ensuring all lights were turned off, alongside adjusting up the space temperature by 2 degrees and decreasing schedules by 2 hours to reflect tenant occupancies, they were able to reduce operating costs on average by 30% while still maintaining a safe operating practice. So you see, the key here was first communicating and then understanding the tenant needs, ultimately allowing them to take action to respond effectively.
Thanks, Trey. So the game has changed. This has been challenging as teams have had to adapt operations, rapidly evaluate new technologies, and establish good communications with their tenants. Now, I'm really excited to introduce our panel.
Thank you, Matt and Trey, for walking us through these findings and key takeaways. As a quick editorial, from where I sit, it's been truly amazing to see how our customers have been both truly proactive in their tenant communications, have been able to meet both their tenant operating requirements and save money during this period of extreme market turbulence. Now I'd like to shift the discussion to a conversation with our all-star panelists. On our panel, we have Accentrus's Chief Executive Officer, Gabe Fink. Gabe. Real estate strategist and prop tech enthusiast, Mike Franzen. Lionstone's Investments Chief Operating Officer, Tom Patterson. Thanks, Tom. And ESG and Sustainability Consultant, Sarah Schoen. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so let's start. Tom, why don't we start with you? The first question, what have you heard or read that has most dramatically changed your perspective on how to operate office buildings post-COVID?
Sure, thanks. So first off, thanks for the opportunity to be here with you all and this great panel and talk about the brave new world that we're in here. So thanks for that. In regards to the question in the article, I think, for me and for Lionstone, one of the things that has been very interesting in this process has been just when you think about tenants in particular, thinking about the spectrum that exists between, typically the greater the control that exists for the tenant, then the more comfort they have with their situation and the greater willingness they're going to have to, perhaps enter the office and the workplace more quickly. And so when you think about just that spectrum, you immediately can think about a scenario where on one side you have a sophisticated single tenant type of owner or user, and they're able to control their destiny. And then on the other side of that, you have a small tenant as part of a large multi-tenant office building, and they have much higher levels of uncertainty. They not only have to figure out their own protocols on inside their own unique office on returning to the office, and they may or may not be well equipped to do that, but then they also have to underwrite and get comfortable with their neighbors and the building and really understand the protocols that are in place there. And so with that as the backdrop, one of the most interesting things that I read, and this was pretty early in the process, but there was a Wall Street Journal article that I think must have even been in the May timeframe, and it focused on early stage return to the office, and it actually focused on a tenant local here. I'm in Houston, we're in Houston, and it kind of did a profile of Chevron. So a tenant, an owner-occupied building, a large-scale single tenant, very sophisticated facilities team, but it went into depths on the great difficulty that they were having on returning to the office. Texas was a little bit on the leading edge to reopening, perhaps too soon. Chevron was one of the first that were trying to get back to their headquarters and bring people in. And they were having difficulty reloading the building, the high rise in CBD, and getting people up the elevators and doing that comfortably. And so what's interesting is I think this group of panelists that we have here, most of us still to this day, I think are portfolio occupancies are in the 10 to 20% occupancy range. And so this is something that we've actively been thinking about and planning for, but the realities of actually getting back to that full occupancy and dealing with it on a day in, day out basis is still a distance away, it feels like. And so that article for me reinforced, I think, the need to dive a little deeper in terms of planning, in terms of that tenant coordination. Again, if Chevron can't load their building floor by floor and it's all their own tenants, then making sure that additional coordination with tenants in a multi-tenant building is just essential, and communicating plans and certainties. And so not only that, but I think it also reinforced from Lionstone's view, it reinforced, and you'll probably hear this a couple times today, but reinforced a trend that we'd already been following. And that's a near to probably medium-term shift in preferences away from, some of these CBD high-rises and just the overall comfort and use environment, and think that over a near-term basis, a shift to a small to mid-size office building will probably be easier, more comfortable as we deal with these types of things. And so Lionstone's actively thinking about that in our investing business, and thinking about, a bunch of new metrics and how we measure and evaluate buildings in that regard.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Super helpful. So Sarah, you obviously have an interesting perspective as a former operator where you were the head of sustainability for Clarion, and now you have your own consulting firm where you're working with a variety of leading operators. What are you hearing out there from your customers and what they're hearing from their tenants?
Yeah, so I think the biggest highlight is proactive communication, just to really stay on top of it and send a lot of electronic communications. I think people don't want to be necessarily approached in the lobby. They want to feel safe, but just being ahead of what tenants are asking for. And then another key piece, I think, is making sure to differentiate between office operators' kind of desire to get people back, but then what the occupants and tenants are actually asking for and wanting. Because I think there's a little bit of a risk of getting almost like too nervous about occupancy and almost wanting to pull people back more quickly than maybe the tenants are even asking for. And that obviously varies by company, by occupant, but some really are not in a rush, and just figuring out, how the building operators can be supportive of that, even if it's a few people coming in occasionally, and just really staying in touch and being really transparent about the efforts that the operators are making to make the space safe, whatever it is that the tenants actually want to use it for.
Okay, great. Thank you. What about you, Gabe? You, like Tom, have a national portfolio, and so you got a ton of data points across the country. What are you hearing from your property teams and your asset managers?
Yeah, well, we started looking at this air quality issue in April, and the first step we did was just to poll our properties to understand, what filters we had at the properties, because it wasn't something that we focused on at a portfolio level before, and we were trying to narrow down, what we should be doing, and then in May, ASHRAE came out with their guidelines, which was really helpful because we could then quickly say, okay, if you're at MERV 8, let's upgrade to MERV 13. If you're at MERV 13, look at MERV 14 or 15 or 16. But we were quickly able to adopt ASHRAE's guidelines and implement that across the portfolio. And so we did what everybody I'm sure is now doing, which is longer run times and more outside air to get more air changes in the property. But as part of that, and we obviously talked to Bracklet about it, there are some energy consequences of doing that. We didn't anticipate back in May that occupancies in July or August would be down in the 10 to 20% range that Tom mentioned, but that's where they are. And so we were more concerned about the energy ramifications of upgrading these filters, and that really hasn't been an issue. But at least now we have the technology that we can monitor that and communicate with the tenants. Yes, we have upgraded our air quality, and there is going to be a cost associated with that. And so when occupancies do return, we'll have better information in order to communicate what those cost benefits are.
Okay, thank you. Mike, what about you? So you obviously have a different perspective as well, as a former operator, former COO of Parkway Properties, and now someone who's sitting on the sidelines, kind of observing all the different things that are going on, and trying to figure out your next move and what your next venture is going to be. How do you see all this playing out, and what are you hearing from the industry?
Thanks, Eric, and like everyone said, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's interesting, and like you said, it's a unique perspective. I actually left what I was doing last summer because I felt a growing sense that there was a disconnect between the way we operated office buildings and what we were seeing tenants need. And as I think everybody on this panel knows, when you're kind of in the firefight, you're in the trenches. It's hard to step out of it, think long and hard. And so I've been gifted with that chance. And actually, the nature of your initial question is, what have you read that's really changed your perspective? So I, kind of pulling out of it, because I think everybody's provided great insights, just what's going on at ground level. But I've read a lot of non-real estate books and a lot of books on disruptors, innovation in other industries, just to study, what I might have missed the last 10 years running office portfolios. And so read a book by a guy that unfortunately passed away earlier this year, but I think most people know Clayton Christensen. He's written a ton of stuff on innovation. He was, I think, viewed very positively as the author of many things related to that. But he wrote a book called Competing Against Luck and introduces the jobs theory. And so one of my aha moments, and there's been many, is this notion of what job does your customer want to get done and how well are you accommodating that? And I didn't think it through nearly as articulately as Clayton lays out. But one of the challenges beyond just, some of the things that you guys have presented and do such a good job of is, but I think you're seeing it in Tom's commentary and Gabe's commentary, is what job is the office occupier of today, but more importantly tomorrow, really needing this big box in the sky, this office building, to actually do? Is it work? I think we're proving. We're all sitting on a Zoom, and we were joking early on, I look great from the waist up, but I have my biking shorts on for right after this panel. We've gotten pretty good. We've gotten pretty good at this.
I'm not supposed to tell anybody that, but
yeah, we're gonna. So I think that's the big epiphany for me that I'm digging deep on. Tom and I actually had a chance to work together when I was at Parkway and Limestone in Austin. We kind of collaborated to do the first deal in 2014 with this thing called co-working and this little group called WeWork. And I don't know about Tom, but it forever changed my view on a lot of things. And here we sit 6 years later, and we're talking about a technology, one of quite a few that an owner and an operator have to contend with to be what they need to be going forward.
okay, super helpful. Anybody want to respond to Mike's comments, or should we move to the next question? Okay, moving along. Next question. What assurances are you being most asked to provide or hearing tenants need in relation to them feeling comfortable to return to their offices? I'll throw this one out to you, Gabe, first.
Yeah, I would tell you that with occupancies down in the 10 to 15% range, we're not being asked a lot. What we're trying to anticipate is when those tenants do feel comfortable coming back in the office, what's going to make them feel safe. And so it's more, we're more pushing out some technologies and some products in order to anticipate, when tenants want to feel safe, what can we provide that, from a competitive standpoint or just a safety standpoint, makes us stand out. And so a couple of those things are, obviously we talked about air quality, so the MERV filters, upgrading that, but then we want to be able to communicate quantitatively what that's doing. So we're implementing some other technologies like reset and air quality monitors, so we can show them graphically, this is how clean your air is. Obviously the amount of cleanliness that we're able to provide, and some technologies like nanoseptic. I don't know if everybody on the call is promoting nanoseptic, but the ability to protect some hard surfaces when occupancy returns, I think is important. But no, I don't think anybody's really asking for that. We're just trying to anticipate that.
Okay, super helpful. Let's see. Let's go to Sarah. Sarah, what are you hearing from your customers about inquiries they're getting from their tenants, just what they're doing to make their tenants feel comfortable, for when people start to come back to the buildings, whether it's September, which I think we all hope, or it's later in the year or even early next year.
Yep. So I've heard a surprising number of requests for make our windows operable, which we in real estate know is not so simple, but I've actually heard that many, many times. And then a request that's more realistic, maybe for some outdoor space. So I've seen some get a little creative with using whatever outdoor space they have to offer it to tenants. It's going to get harder depending on the climate in the winter, obviously, and in certain places in the summer, it's not workable either. But just really using whatever space is available creatively. And then I think, tenants do want to know that building management is doing everything they can to save energy while occupancy is low, especially if they're on the hook for the costs. But also that need for safety. So there's kind of a tension there, but I think what it really comes down to is proactive management and proactive communication. So that's kind of the theme for me, is just, focusing on it, communicating everything you're doing. And this is a long game. It's, a marathon, not a sprint. So just making sure that it becomes integrated as one of the priorities for the teams, that they're not, focusing on it for a few months, then they get distracted, but this is something we need to be doing for years. So just making it part of the new way of operating. And I think that covers it.
Okay, great. So Mike, I'll kick it over to you. So what do you think, or what are you hearing in the marketplace, just in relation to all your relationships, I guess, back at Parkway, and then with other operators you're talking to about what they're hearing from their tenants, and then what would be your thoughts on a tenant communication plan to provide everybody the comfort they need to come back?
Yeah, I think the sentiments, that have been expressed in terms of where we're at is pretty true. I think there's more than just the workplace. I think we've talked through, people are contending with school, and what am I going to do, with my kids this fall for school, and is it going to extend into the spring? So there's so much that goes into, what a company and the employees have to deal with. The thing that strikes me, and we were always, kind of living and breathing it as an owner operator, is communication, which we all agree is hugely important, is heavily predicated on the quality of the underlying relationship. So, in other words, if my wife and I are at a really healthy place in our relationship, the nature of our communication is much different. And if something comes up that's less than ideal, it's gonna help us get through that quicker. I think about the idea of somebody, it's not I wish I could claim it, it's not my idea, but some company I heard said they were implementing this idea of APIs. And that meant assume positive intent, because so much of what we're seeing is email, so much of what we're seeing, and unfortunately, as somebody that's been in the industry for a long time, I think where we find ourselves in the generic relationship owner to tenant is such that not necessarily living APIs. And so what Tom and Gabe and anybody that are living that operator world, there's a high degree of inherent skepticism because of where the relationship's been for the last 3 decades of what the intent is. And we're assuming that people are dying to get back to the office, and I'm giving you just some assurances it'll be fun, but I'm not so sure that's even the case. And so just that relationship and where we find ourselves coming out of this, beyond just where the building is and the systems are become hugely important. You know, again, it goes back to my job. What job is the occupier needing me to do? And how do I change the nature of everything I communicate so that it's got a lot more API in it than, you know, there's a lot of lawyers involved in our business. Like, and there's a lot of decisions made based on those with lawyers, and I've seen my fair share. So.
Okay, great insight. Thanks for the marriage tips as well.
No, you
Super
don't want it
helpful.
for me.
Tom, I'll turn it over to you for the last word on this subject.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think big ditto on everyone's thoughts related to communication. You know, Lionstone's always had a bit of a mantra on performance and trust. And in these moments when you have times of crisis, to get that trust right, one, it's paramount. And it means that you've got to communicate and have hyper transparency and, you know, increase it 2 to 3 times what would be normal. And so in this instance, you know, with tenants, you know, there's a wide range of assurances that they're looking for. Some are small and random, and some are broad and meaningful. And I think the importance back to communication is being able to have, you know, a single but really global communications to tenants. And that's, you know, when you're ready to come back, we're ready for you, right? You've been gone for a while, and literally during that time period, we've rethought everything on while you've been gone, and in terms of how to operate these buildings, whether it's, you know, from the moment you enter the building, how you get upstairs, to how we clean and sanitize your space, and your air quality while you're here, to how we take in guests and how we take in packages, and then how you exit. And then we do it all over again before you come back the next day. And so I think, you know, we're not unique in that. I think everyone's trying to do these things. And however, but I think the proactive means of communicating that to your tenants takes a big question off. And because if you don't do it proactively, if you're waiting for that question to come, then it's already a lost opportunity. And I think if you wait for the question to get asked, then you've already lost that battle a little bit, and you're probably just prolonging the time period before when they come back. But if you're able to hit it head on, and through ongoing proactive communications to, you know, let them know what steps you've taken and what you're already doing before they're even thinking about coming back, then it just facilitates that process to a great degree.
Okay, helpful. So one question I had for the panel. So we as a company, Bracklet, you know, we're focused on tenant comfort and safety, but we're also focused on helping our customers reduce their operating and capital costs. So question for the panel is, from an operating cost perspective, have you received inquiries from any of your tenants who are under triple net leases about what you're doing above and beyond safety to reduce cost during these periods of obviously low occupancy? Gabe, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I think I want to rephrase that question. The short answer is no.
Okay.
But the longer answer is, I think that things like LEED certification and Bracklet's technology and things that are going to help save energy costs are going to be important over the next decade, right? But over the next year or two, I think it's not about energy savings. You know, it's about keeping employees safe and keeping, you know, your customers happy. And what we're trying to communicate, you know, because our property managers and the chief engineers have been trained for 3 or 4 decades to find areas to save expenses, right? That's what that's how they add value to the property. But we're trying to change the thought process to be, you know, it's everything that Tom mentioned and Mike and Sarah mentioned, but it's not so much about saving money right now. It's doing everything you can, you know, running the equipment longer, right? More outside air, you know, higher efficiency filters. It's things that cost energy, cost money, but do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. We don't know how long that's going to last. Is it a year or two? maybe, but then after that, we'll get back to energy savings. So that's where we are.
Okay, helpful. So Tom, what's your perspective? In an ideal world, you could accomplish both, and I think there are ways you can accomplish both, but obviously mission critical on the tenant comfort and safety side. But what are your thoughts on that? And have you guys been receiving any questions across your portfolio? I know you got a lot of triple net leases in a lot of your buildings.
Yeah, I would say, big ditto to again, what Gabe said. I do think that it might be a consideration for tenants. It's certainly not the number one consideration at this point. If it's here, then health and safety is leaps and bounds ahead. And so, I do think that if you can optimize the situation though, and to some of the comments that were made from the Bracklet team on the lead-in and being able to optimize both, right? Then that's real differentiator also. And so again, that's really the Bracklet sweet spot. And I think the low hanging fruit and that exists in this situation. Whereas, I think back to, a handful of years ago where if building engineers or owners were trying to navigate through this with just based on gut and intuition when people were going to be there and how they were going to operate their buildings, this would be a lot more complex. But the ability to quantitatively assess the situation and the complexity and measure it and try and get not only the effectiveness at improving the air quality, but at the same time, if you're able to kind of work with a team like the Bracklet team to kind of figure out that sweet spot and combination of run hours and filters and the UV lighting on coils and kind of get that formula right, then that's a real opportunity. And because it also leads into I think we're in the middle of it. We might not all realize it, but we're in the big tidal wave of the rise of ESG right now. I know it's not like a new consideration, but again, what we're dealing with right now greatly accelerates it. And so if we're able to provide that safety and peace of mind at the same time that we're able to reduce consumption and experience cost savings, then that's really great.
Okay, super helpful. So that's a perfect segue for you, Sarah. So based on all of our conversations, I know that you're focused on working with your customers about the fact that ESG and reducing costs is not necessarily mutually exclusive. So why don't we just roll forward to 6 months from now when people are back in the buildings, the economy is still struggling to regain its footing, the real estate market is tough. How do you see this playing out in terms of just that balance of ESG, keeping people safe, but then also, as an imperative, having to reduce cost so you can be competitive in the marketplace to keep up your occupancy and to be in a position to be more aggressive on rents? Sarah, are you there? Did we lose Sarah? Okay, Mike, I will kick that over to you then, and we'll come back to Sarah.
Yeah, no,
I think we're good. There we go. Hey, Sarah.
Sorry about that.
So did you hear the question, or should we let Mike go and then come back to you? Or are you ready to go? Looks like you're ready to go.
I did catch the question. Yep. So I think we've talked about this a lot, but now it's more important than ever for ESG to really focus on returns and delivering financial value to owners, investors, and obviously increasing ventilation and filter quality can increase operating expenses.
Yep.
But I think that being forced to look more closely at mechanical systems in the long term is really an opportunity to improve operations. And it's almost like with many other things with COVID, we're being forced to do things, and then we're learning from them and seeing benefits that were kind of unanticipated. And I think that's always been the case that drives attention to operations, can really become an opportunity for delivering higher quality indoor environments to occupants, but also, reduce costs. And it's really about attention and putting some of that ingenuity of the team, on that area. And, there's already been a lot of focus over the years, obviously, on energy efficiency, but this is just one more catalyst to drive that attention and bring, from senior all the way down to the, to building engineers, just really engaging at a higher level and looking more closely. And it's really just good motivation for that. And I think that long-term that will actually lead to OpEx savings. And we need to ride this out for now. And also obviously improved air quality and a better indoor environment for tenants. And I think, also just seeing how this has played out within different companies, the more on top of building operations you are, the better you're positioned to kind of deal with challenges and curveballs like this. And I've really seen that to be true. It's kind of common sense, but there's nothing like a real situation, kind of a crisis situation to really drive that home and let you see it on the ground. So I do think there are increased costs now, but long-term it'll benefit energy efficiency and indoor environmental quality. And I just think that, forcing us to just pay more attention to systems that it's hard to pay attention to because business is so busy is a really good thing in the long term, even though, the cause of it is not good. No one would choose it. But just like I was forced to spend more time, with my kids, it was stressful, when schools closed, but it was also really a positive thing. And I think it's a similar situation here.
Yeah, that's great. We're certainly finding that people are a lot more open to technology, and this is forcing people to really reevaluate what they're doing and to look at what's out there and how they can really change the way they do things. And so let me kick it off lastly to Mike. Mike, you're obviously a prop tech enthusiast. Have been out there in the public realm for multiple years, supporting us and a variety of other prop tech companies. What's your view on this? How do you think where we are from a technology adoption perspective, and where does the industry need to go to really step up the service we're providing tenants?
For us, being an early adopter in the prop tech was always a means to an end. So, it was always an opportunity for us to get better and to potentially, chase some additional revenue opportunities we'd seen to go do some things. And the truth is, even today, more than usual, office as a class is probably under more pressure. It is capital intensive if you have choices. And this is the one thing I'm finding is a lot of big groups that are not in office or maybe we're thinking about office or not thinking as much about it. Maybe they want to go chase industrial or they think there's some opportunity in multi, whatever it is. Office is under pressure. And so I would just say and offer that to me, as you pursue and look at new opportunities on the revenue side to, fully discover, things beyond just the traditional 10-year lease in the office stack, I think you're going to struggle, and because I lived it, you will struggle to extract those opportunities if you haven't laid the groundwork on technology. If you don't know what your building is capable of, if you don't know what your weak spots are, and you're contemplating a big capital expenditure on an energy management system, a new chiller, and you're not rolling that into some projections and some ideas you have around additional opportunities on revenue, I think you're going to end up missing. And that means your team has to be constructed differently. I mean, we talk about things like hospitality. You talk about, there's so many layers to this, but the underlying strength of those opportunities to me resides in the data, in the hard facts that you're collecting from information. And I think Tom said it, it's peace of mind. It's one thing to go to your customer and say, hey, we're going to do this. It's another to go and show them and hold up a set of data and say, look, we're actually following the golden rule. You're here because you decided you didn't want to be in real estate and you wanted us to be a steward of real estate on your behalf. Here are the things we're doing in that relationship that I think you're going to be really glad that you're in that relationship for.
Okay, super helpful. And this will lead to our last question. Tom, I'll kick this off to you, but what can owners and property teams do to provide tenants the flexibility they need to deal with, today's both high level of uncertainty, which is just off the charts, and then the disbursement of their workforce says, work from home was initially forced, but it's continuing to be the status quo, and obviously creating a lot of change out there in terms of just companies and where their workforces reside.
Sure. First off, I'd like to thank Sarah for joining me in my technical difficulties, so I'm not the only one without the little logos in the background, so I don't feel so alone now. So thank you. No, but how can we best serve tenants and give them what they need in the moment of uncertainty? I think a big theme is flexibility, and not only that, through there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to address short-term needs, whether it's move-in ready spec suites, or whether it's co-working, which is, I think, a big tool available for flexibility. That said, too much of that income's a little bit toxic right now, given some credit concerns and that sort of thing. And so I do think it does become incumbent on the landlord to find new ways to, and the owner to find new ways to provide that flexibility. And we're trying to do a number of things along those lines with, short-term leases, just in terms of flexibilities, or new ways through license agreements, and those sorts of tools. But I think, bigger picture, I like the words that Mike used a moment ago. It's really now, the game truly has changed. You guys should name a webinar after it. But the fact that if you're not already thinking about, if you just think that you're still selling space, right, then you're not in the right business. And this is a moment where, office is going to continue to be under pressure. There's not like a big new wave of new demand coming in. And so it does really require that shift in mentality to be the steward of their real estate, to manage it for them. And I think if you're not already thinking about, your buildings as a service, then you're really late. And now it's even more so important. The safety and cleanliness is just the baseline. But I think we've got to think about our office buildings as tools to facilitate culture, to facilitate sustainability, to facilitate health and wellness, and do all these things at a minimum to be able to succeed going forward.
Right. Okay. Helpful. So, Gabe, Mike and Tom just laid a lot out there. What would you like to add on that front?
Yeah, I think Tom nailed it. But we've seen in past crises that tenants need flexibility and renewal rates go up, right? But we're not trying to force somebody because their lease is rolling into a 5 or 10 year commitment when they don't know what their needs are for that long. So we're offering a lot of short-term flexibility on renewals, and yet there are some tenants that are still taking more space because they're looking at this as a chance to lock in some space for longer term. So I think just being open-minded to what tenants are coming to you with is the key, and not being rigid in your demands. But the one thing that Sarah mentioned that I want to jump on is in the ESG, and I'm going back one question, but the
Sure.
ESG and that conflict between energy savings but the health and wellness of your tenants. I do think that we had started thinking about air quality in terms of helping our customers. Even before COVID, we were thinking about the benefits of lower carbon dioxide in the buildings, and how air ventilation helps cognitive performance. but now this crisis has allowed us to accelerate that. And I do think that with Bracklett's technology and air quality monitors, whether it's in suite or in duct, with the benefit of all that information, I think there's amazing things that you can do that have now been accelerated because of the crisis. And so I do think if you start thinking about how you can improve those the performance of your tenants and the quality of your buildings over the long term, there is a lot you can do.
Okay, great. So Sarah, are you still there? I know you're having a little technical difficulties.
I am here, hopefully loud and clear.
Okay, great. So I'm going to let you finish us off here. So, you're obviously on a panel with what I think we can all agree are 3 progressive operators. Where do you think the industry is generally in relation to what Tom, Gabe, and Mike are talking about? Yeah, where is this going to be? The moment, the disruption that creates real change in the industry, and people are going to become much more progressive, much more focused on utilizing technology, really upping their standards in terms of, cost cutting and then ESG reporting. Where is the industry today, and how you think this whole event's going to change everything?
Yeah, so obviously none of my clients, but there are definitely operators that are less proactive than this group here. Might experience questions from tenants, especially the requests for more expensive measures to be kind of a pain, a burden. And obviously that's not rewarded by the market in the medium or long term. Tenants do care about service, and that's the trend as we keep hearing. I do think this is a catalyst no matter what. And the road for real estate to adopt technology has been a very long and slow one. And I think every little kind of nudge in that direction helps. But I think we are at a kind of a point of accelerated change right now. And, I think we will see obviously changes in just what's expected in terms of engaging with technology and mechanical systems. And, there's going to continue to be a spectrum at the top, companies that are actually monitoring indoor air quality and providing a lot of information and exploring new technologies. And then, a big middle that's following kind of behind the leading edge. And then there are always going to be laggards. But obviously the whole thing, even before COVID, was being pulled in a certain direction, the whole market. And this will speed it up. And I think, we have a ways to go. It's an exciting time because there's a lot of room for increased technology in buildings. And, everyone here is kind of right in the middle of that, that fight, that, the progress. And I think it's just going to increase. And there's a lot of existing technology that we haven't fully taken advantage of. So I'm just excited to watch it unfold. Okay,
great. Let's end on that positive note. Big thanks to our panel for giving us all their valuable insights. Now we're going to open up to questions from our audience. Hold on one second here. Okay, so one question, and I'll also open this up to Matt and Trey as well. It's questions about UV lighting, and the question is, are we talking about overhead or portable lights? And are there any additional concerns about the harmful effects? So I think when we're talking about UV lighting, we're talking about UV lighting that's actually built into or installed into air handling units. But Trey, you want to expand on that a little bit? Just about its effectiveness and any harmful effects?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We were referencing in the slides the use of UV lighting as installed in air handling units and its efficacy due to a lack of residence time or exposure time for viral particles. And specifically, I think what's referenced by the question would probably be the solution that installs UV lighting in an upward facing fashion in common spaces. Hospitals already use some of this technology in certain rooms where direct exposure is not an issue. They're facing it towards where naturally particles would tend to rise due to natural convection. There's a lot of reasons why that's a good use case. But ultimately it's because the residence time at that ceiling level avoids exposure to humans and also exposes the viral particles most effectively for the time that it needs to be exposed.
Okay, thanks, Trey. So another question, I'm going to throw this to Sarah. So the question from the audience is, how are asset teams considering third-party certifications? They listed well, fit well, reset, to help tenants feel more comfortable about reoccupying their offices. Are you familiar with those programs, Sarah?
Yeah, and I think it really depends on the tenant demand for those. You know, do they have name recognition? Are tenants asking, if you tell a tenant, you know, we got certified, does that mean something to them? And it probably does in some cases. And I think that is kind of a local question and decision of, like, back to relationships, knowing your tenants well and whether they would value that. I think if there's trust, you can also implement what makes up the certifications and communicate it proactively, and perhaps get much of the value, and, you know, kind of stay in the decision-making seat where you're doing what you think is most impactful and not necessarily doing things to meet requirements set by others. But it does, you know, there is value in having a third party sometimes set a standard and verify that you've met it. So I think it's really, I would take it case by case and just be smart about how you implement it.
Okay, Gabe, Tom, you come across these programs?
Yeah, I would, you know, echo what Sarah said. I think, you know, the fit well and the well building, they're relatively new. We're exploring them in a number of cases. That they don't, I think, not the right thing everywhere, but it is they do cover and you know, certify things like air quality, and so it's a way in my mind to play offense a little bit, and not just get these things right, but to provide a level of differentiation in your marketing and kind of an external certification or validation that, you know, not just trust what I'm saying, but, you know, this has been reviewed and signed off on by a third party. And, you know, we do, it's kind of its own form of LEED certification, but, you know, around health and wellness and indoor air quality. And so we think it's important. In certain instances, we think it can be really useful, but probably not a one size fits all.
Okay, great. And Gabe, do you want to chime in?
We like reset certification, and we're going to be rolling that out across our portfolio.
Okay, great. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So question is, how do you see building design changing going forward in response to the pandemic? Mike, I'll start with you. What are you hearing people talking about on the development side?
You know, I think it's everything we've kind of talked around and about, which is, you know, flexibility, which is agility. I think we as an owner, you want a building, you're not respending mountains of capital every 2 years based on a new trend. I think, you know, we've touched on it. It's going to take a minute for urban environments to kind of just psychologically. I mean, I'm a guy that lived in and out of those, and for the last year, I've lived this. You know, I joke the coffee shop life. And so just, you know, the longer we're in this state, you know, the harder it's going to be for companies. I mean, we're talking about these programs, but the truth is, I think companies are needing to find ways to compel their workers to come and feel safer and they're fighting. That's the one thing we haven't necessarily touched on is, there go my dogs, you know, it's only winter time for they went crazy. Yeah. So I think buildings are going to come in shapes and sizes. We, you know, TBD on, you know, like every good Texan, and spent my week in the mountains of Colorado this summer. And, you know, I think there could be a resurgence in places, you know, and, you know, Eric, you and I've talked about this. As we redefine what it means to work and where you need to work, and maybe you still have a home base in Denver, but you do have a, you know, an office you allow your workers to go to somewhere else. So it's, as someone told me, I wouldn't run out right now until we know everything and rebuild everything. But I think it would be naive to think there isn't some pretty major restructuring coming that you just need to be laying the groundwork for.
Okay. So Tom, we talked about this the other day. You guys obviously have a $1 billion plus development portfolio. How are you guys thinking about, design changes? And let's, I guess, more on the technical side, just in terms of, and I'll let our guys chime in as well, but, design of HVAC systems, design of, lobbies for secure, for health checks, different things like that. What are you guys evaluating with all your different development partners and your different architects and, mechanical design firms?
Yeah, I think, a big topic that we've covered here, the office of the future is, in terms of HVAC and ventilation, air quality, it must be state of the art. And a lot of today's systems are designed around the open office plan. And, we've got don't think that there's going to be a wholesale shift, but, you are starting to see some key tenants. I know everyone's just recently saw the Google announcement on how they're not going to, be heading back to the office until June, or not going to, force employees to be back in the office till June. People have the opportunity to come back sooner if they choose. But with that, they're thinking about, in some instances we've heard, stop some build outs that were in process to nearly double their square feet per employee. And so, do we see reversing in trends of, the open workspace in favor of private office? Like, those are things that could happen with this. We're not big believers in we think office in general should be flexible enough to host any, workplace strategy for an individual tenant. But I do think things related to HVAC systems and designs, and at a minimum having, all the latest bells and whistles and filtration and CO2 monitoring is pretty essential. And again, I think in terms of preferences, our general view is that, again, kind of the small, low to mid-rise buildings, at least for a period, are going to be in favor. Not only are they easier to load, you can take the stairs, and maybe that facilitates your health and wellness in addition to air quality. But I think there's additional opportunities to do indoor-outdoor space and for bigger balances of the user population in smaller buildings than certainly in a high rise. And so all these things, that it's to the statement I made before about facilitating culture, facilitating, ESG for tenants and health and wellness. I think the building's got to do that. And for a period, I think you are going to perhaps shift away from, these big, CBD high rises. That's our view.
Okay, great. And Gabe, I know you guys just commissioned several new buildings, but and not exactly sure what's on your development pipeline, but do you just want to talk about very quickly how you're thinking about this going forward?
I think Tom and Mike nailed it. We are building, we will over the next few years be building more spec office and light and air and good ceiling heights and flexible floor plans never go out of style. We can't anticipate whether our tenants in that period are going to be putting in a dense office space or exterior offices. We just want flexibility.
Okay, great. Okay, so Sarah, you have the last word. So as a strategic advisor to, several large operators, what conversations are you having to kind of change just a longer term perspective on development, taking into, into consideration everything we've learned from this pandemic?
Yeah, I think you all covered it really well. Air quality, ventilation, filtration capacity, because some systems obviously limit what you can do with filters. So just having the higher end of the range in mind and making sure that you can respond to situations, whether it just be regular market trends or something like this, like a pandemic, that you can respond as you need to with the systems. And then, I personally don't want to be in a box without a window that I can open. And that would be a pretty dramatic rethinking of, Class A office development, but thinking hard about operable windows. I'm not an expert. I don't know what the challenges would be or what the pushback would be, but I think it's a really important thing to think about.
And then someone else mentioned the indoor outdoor space, just, really thinking through, I don't think we're going to see balconies, but some kind of option to, you see this in suburban office much more, but just outdoor space, and urban is a bigger challenge. So what can we do to improve that?
Okay, good stuff. Thank you for everybody. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So we'd like to thank our amazing panel, Tom, Gabe, Sarah, Mike, greatly appreciated. And then everybody else who's joined us for this compelling discussion. If you have any additional questions about any of the topics and recommendations that you heard on our webinar today, please reach out to us at info@bracklet.com, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.